What's going on, everybody? It's live stream 39, and the topic of the hour is possible war with China. Now, we've had several conversations pertaining to this topic in the past, but guys, it looks like the ball is in motion. A lot of stuff we've talked about in past live streams pertaining to this are coming to fruition. So, yeah, we'll go around the horn. I got some unusual panel suspects today, and I brought in a somewhat of a subject matter expert in terms of naval operations. So, yeah, we'll kick this around for a while. So first and foremost, got my good buddy Chad. Pronouns, let's go, and Brandon. Chad and I served together in the United States Marine Corps, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines, in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, back in the 2010-2011 timeframe. Chad also served in 1st LAR. He was in the initial invasion of Iraq, 2003, and redeployed in 2004 and fought in the Battle of Fallujah. Chad is studying for his military doctorate degree. Brings a excellent perspective to the chat. Always very educated point of view. And Chad, appreciate you coming on.
Glad to be here.
All right, next we got Les with Pegasus Tests. Les has his own logistics company. He was a Marine, served back in the early 90s. He's a veteran of the Gulf War. He has his own tactical training company called Polaris Tactics and Simulations Division. He's also the company commander of Bravo Company, One Shepherd Leadership Institute, based out of West Virginia. So Les always brings an excellent perspective to the chat. Les, thanks for jumping on tonight.
Glad to be here, Brent.
All right, next, we got the good doc, Dr. Christopher Larson. Be sure to check out his YouTube channel. That's what it's called, Christopher Larson. Doc is the original founder of the One Shepherd Leadership Institute, going 40 years strong. He served in the United States Army in the 80s. He's a veteran of Korea. He served on 38th Parallels, got hook and jabbing with the North Koreans from time to time. And he's posted a recent video that's very entertaining about leading his patrol into a minefield. So be sure to check that one out. It's worth the watch, guys. But Doc, always a pleasure having you on tonight. All right, next we got the good Bruce at Camp Armament. That is his YouTube channel. That is his Instagram handle. Be sure to check him out. Bruce is my right-hand man. He's damn near in every video I've ever posted. And he always brings an excellent civilian perspective to the chat. And Bruce is a former aircraft mechanic. He's been to a lot of tactical shooting courses and just brings that civilian perspective for us. So, Bruce, thanks for jumping on for us tonight. All right, my next guest, he does not have a video feed. However, I do have a nice little meme for him. It's Rob. And Rob, can you hear us? Uh-oh. Well, we'll work on that. But Rob was a surface naval warfare officer, and he served in the U.S. Navy. He's no longer in, but he does have some incredible experience. He always brings an educated perspective to the group in terms of naval operations. So we'll appreciate having him on. And as soon as Rob gets his comms up and running, we'll have him jump in. So that said, guys, I'm going to go around the horn and give every guy a couple-minute monologue to say their piece on the situation. So starting off this ball game, we got Les. Take it, brother.
Got it. All right. So obviously with Miss Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the Chinese have gotten a little upset. Okay, a lot upset, all out of proportion upset, because a visit like this is not unprecedented by any means. So they've chosen to rattle the saber pretty hard, violate the airspace of Taiwan pretty hard, fire missiles over the country. So generally letting everybody know that, hey, we're conducting a pre-invasion drill. Now, I've said it since probably one of our very first of these live streams that I don't understand why China hasn't done it yet. Each day that goes by, it's going to get harder for them to do because clearly the Taiwanese are preparing. We're giving them more arms deals. I was just reading about a deal a month or so ago where we're going to give them 66 new F-16s plus an aid package to upgrade their current F-16s to the Viper standard. So they're getting better. They're getting M1 tanks. There's other weapon systems coming. So the longer China waits, the harder battle this is going to be for them.
Okay. I am not pro-Chinese government. I do not like communists at all. And one of my very least favorite communist governments would be China. If they all fell off the face of the earth tomorrow, I wouldn't shed a tear. That said, I'm a bit of a fence sitter on this one. I'm not going to be pro-China, and so I don't want to be shoved in that corner. I'm not going to jump off this fence and go to the pro-China side. That said, I can't feel so strongly about China right now. Pelosi coming and doing her saber rattling in Taiwan, in China's backyard. I feel like if China came and did that in Cuba, we might fire a few missiles over the top of Cuba into the sea as well. It's posturing. I don't think China's. My point here is that China's missing the boat. If they ever wanted to take Taiwan in the weeks leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, they should have negotiated with Putin for the Navy and air assets to protect them, and they should have taken Taiwan simultaneous with Russia's invasion into Ukraine. I don't mean that they should have, I mean they should have, meaning that would have been the logical thing. Now that that whole entire war is sputtering and the Russians are on their back foot, all eyes are on China. And I'm becoming somewhat convinced that China doesn't intend to win Taiwan over by military means. Yes, they're going to saber rattle. Yes, they're angry at Pelosi in America for meddling in their sphere of the influence of the world as China sees it, and they can sit and spin because I don't care what they're concerned about. But if I'm trying to understand what they're doing, it seems like it's saber rattling. I noticed that the Taiwanese aren't very concerned about it. And I think China wants to win Taiwan over economically or by other means other than war. So let's sit I'm willing to be wrong here. I'm willing to listen.
Well, I was talking to a good friend of mine who's kind of interested in this stuff more in Russia than anything, but he's an electronics guy, knows that we have, depending on Taiwan and Taiwan's relative independence on that side from a country, our country's infrastructure. So I listened to what he said a little bit, and I don't disagree with him. He sort of, Doc has likened it to Cuba, and that's fair. I get, that's a fair analogy. My buddy kind of thought it was more analogous to like Ukraine, where under our current political climate, we have a relatively what we think is a weak leader. Democrats, and I don't try to necessarily make this Democrat Republican, but I kind of have to in this case because, under Barack Obama, you had Russians encroaching on Ukraine, and then during Trump, nothing happened. And then as soon as Biden gets in, Russia makes another move. And the question is, why is that? Well, I think that part of that is that they say it's sort of a long shot, but if they're ever going to do it, anytime in the next 8 years, they had to do it now. It was the only chance they had. And I believe Russians made the mistake of doing it now, but they had no other choice. It was either kind of a now or never, or at least a now or much further down the road type approach. It was definitely a mistake because their entire reason, according to them, for moving into Ukraine was to stop the spread of NATO. NATO just picked up 2 new countries because of it. So that didn't really work. Now, let's back up and let's look at Taiwan. Can China realistically launch a naval invasion of Taiwan? We've already discussed this in other streams. That's going to be extremely difficult. But they may be asking themselves, if we're ever going to do it, would now be the time to do it, where the U.S. military would be more reluctant to get involved, rather than we have our president. Nobody knows who that's going to be, but it could be someone that's a little more accepting to get in. So take a little firmer stance, not just verbally, but actually physically in protecting our interest in Taiwan. So that's my take on it, guys. Again, I'm no expert. I'm here to learn just like you guys are, surrounded by a lot of great, intelligent people. And I learned as much from things you guys do. My mind's been changed on here before, so we'll see what happens tonight.
All right. So my 2 cents on this. I'm not sure the Taiwan thing is a priority right now for China. I think I said it last time we had this subject. China has some internal issues they have to deal with. And more recently, they had these protests over the banking issue. A popular uprising scares the hell out of the CCP more than anything. And I think Doc is right. China is trying to win by means other than military force in Taiwan. And we'll get to that when we address this right here. Sun Tzu praised the general who wins without fighting. So I think that's kind of the course they're taking. But, the West, we've seen the rise of China since the beginning of the millennium. However, we as a country have been blind to what's been going on behind the scenes. China has been waging an unseen war against us, and it has taken many forms. We've lost jobs to China. We've seen corruption by our political class involving China, and we've seen our own corporations kowtow to Chinese demands. Taiwan is only a small part of this. Quick disclaimer, I'm probably going to be speaking, and I'm probably speaking for everybody on this panel when I say this, but when I speak vitriolic about China, I'm speaking specifically about the CCP, not the Chinese people. So for all you wokies out there, there's my disclaimer. And they're the actual victims of the CCP and should be seen as such, but I digress. Some of the things I want to address tonight involve this unseen war as well as how we can fight back.
Rob, you got comm? All right, he's going to have to go ahead and pop out, Rob, and try to come back in, man. So I guess I'll say my piece while we're waiting on Rob to come back in. So I remember us talking about, Russia, and they were massing on the borders of Ukraine, and they were holding large scale exercise. And I think the vast majority of us did not think that was going to happen, and it did. So, by no stretch of the imagination are we going to be 100% here on getting this right. So, I think it's very, very real possibility. And why I say that is because obviously the number one geopolitical threat for us and peer adversary for us is, with no question, the PRC. And in terms of naval vessels, and I'm sure Rob can speak to this more, they are exceeding us. Now, in terms of capability with each of those vessels, we still have the edge there. But the fact of the matter is they are building numbers. They got numbers of ships, they got numbers of personnel, and if they can get the capability of actually getting those troops to Taiwan and hitting the beaches, it's however way you look at it, it's going to be a tough fight for us if this unfolds. And that's assuming that we're going to get into the fight. Everything that our senior leaders say, they allude that we are going to intervene, but that could just be one just big bluff. Who knows? I would say that it's probably pretty certain that we will intervene. Just looking at the U.S. military and how it's gearing up, it seems to be gearing up for a fight with China. Now, looking at this from the Chinese perspective, is now the time? I think that's the question of the hour. And if you look at Afghanistan and the debacle there, how that all unfolded just last year, that is not by any stretch of the imagination making our U.S. military look good or more capable than ever before. So that they may be emboldened there. I mean, you could probably say that the Russians were emboldened from that Afghanistan and how that all unfolded there at the end. So, are they going to do it? Who knows? But look what they're doing right now, guys. They're holding large scale military exercises just like the Russians did on the Ukrainian border. They're essentially circling Taiwan, a de facto naval blockade. And we all talked about, last time we talked about, a China-Taiwan battle and war unfolding, we talked about naval blockades. So it seems like things are progressing. So we'll see what goes on. But Rob, are you on deck yet, man? Oh well. I'm just gonna open up the floor, and then when Rob gets his comms up and running, just jump in, brother. So, what you guys got?
All right. Well, I'll jump into the fray. Right now, to counter China, who has the world's largest navy, and that's by number of hulls they can put in the water. They do not have a quantitative edge over us yet, but they're getting there. I mean, clearly some of their latest fighter designs are clearly ripped off of the F-35 through espionage. With their aircraft carriers, they're learning quickly. Their first one, the Liang, was built on an old Russian hull.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you, man. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, sorry. Go ahead, Les. I'll talk after you.
All right, I'll finish up real quick. They got their first carrier built, played around with it. Then they found they could build one from their own from scratch. Now they've built a third one, roughly a smaller competitor to our Nimitz/Ford class, but they came ahead with the electronic launching system already. So they are making advances. What they probably don't have in any part of their fleet, be it the surface, subsurface, or air part of their fleet, is proficiency. Proficiency that we've had for decades, an institutional proficiency. Doesn't mean they can't get it quickly. And the historical example there would be how the Japanese surged into being the best at naval aviation right just prior to the Second World War. But we also proved by the end of the Second World War, we built it up and got proficient pretty quick too. So right now, I would say our fleet is quantitatively less than the Chinese, but qualitatively probably superior in all levels, be that tactical proficiency, quality of sailor, and our ability to fight and repair our ships. And with that, Rob, I'll let you jump in. Or maybe not. Doc, did you lend him our radios again?
I'm convinced the Chinese and Russians.
Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Okay. Sorry. I guess I'm being jammed by the commies. All right. So just an intro of me. I am Popeye, and that's about it. So getting right to it. I'm just kidding. I was a surface naval officer, surface warfare officer for just under 9 years. Served on destroyers. I was also a riverine officer. Been on the podcast a couple of times before. I really enjoy talking with you guys. Always great discussions. Have a few paragraphs here prepared for, I guess, current events. So Speaker of the House Pelosi's visit to Taiwan upset the Chinese Communist Party to such a degree that they declared 6 live fire areas outside the island nation surrounding it. According to USNI News, 11 short-range ballistic missiles were launched into these zones, mainly DF-15s. One even overflying Taipei, landing on the eastern side of the island. Japan has also reported some of the missiles landing within its 200-mile exclusive economic zone. According to CSIS, local anger over Taiwan chase caused the WeChat in China to crash, with so many people tracking the speaker's visit so closely. Some wondered why China was unable to compel the visit to be canceled. Saber rattling aside, the paradigm shift is evident as these types of missile drills represent a clear escalation of tension across the strait. Over the weekend, 49 Chinese fighters apparently crossed the median line. Both Chinese aircraft carriers are underway, and their surface combatants are conducting live fire drills in the region. According to the Pentagon spokesman, former Admiral John Kirby, the U.S. wishes to de-escalate tensions, delaying a routine Minuteman II ballistic missile test in the United States. The USS Ronald Reagan, for its part, is underway with its strike group, along with 2 LHAs centered around the Tripoli and the USS America. The outgoing Indo-PACOM admiral alluded to 2027 as being the most dangerous time for a potential Taiwan amphibious invasion or blockade. Author and geopolitical consultant Peter Zion contends China's emergent demographic disaster will constrain her territorial ambitions as her workforce and draftable manpower diminishes. With some census data saying that China's population could shrink by half by 2050 and their usable workforce aging out long before that. China's military capability is still expanding. Her domestic shipyards are the most productive in the world, and her ability to make weapons, sensors, and domestic aircraft make her industry essentially self-sufficient. According to the 2021 DoD study, China's battle force ships will increase from its current 355 to 460 by 2030. According to Congressional Research Service Navy's force structure shipbuilding plans, the U.S. Navy plans to increase its fleet to 300 manned vessels by 2035 with 40 or so unmanned surface vessels. With real investments in U.S. Domestic shipyard infrastructure, they might be able to get to 367 by 2052, but that's a big might. China will likely have 4 to 5 aircraft carriers to America's 11 this decade, but aging U.S. cruisers and other ships stress U.S. naval planners. American overall advantage in tonnage, carrier, and ground-based aviation, drones, ISR, joint capabilities will likely be maintained in the near future, but China holds a local force advantage due to its mere 100 nautical mile distance to Taiwan. Additionally, she possesses sophisticated sensor and missile technology geared toward making any operations within the so-called first island chain extremely dangerous to U.S. or allied forces. Her longer-range bombers and missiles can also threaten Guam. And finally, she has ballistic nuclear capability that does threaten the U.S. mainland if things escalate that far. I do wish to stress China's weaknesses on a broader front. The United States and its allies in the region represent a formidable force with major bases in Japan, Korea, Guam, and Hawaii. Currently, China is trying to create relationships with the Solomon Islands and Cambodia and Africa to secure its sea lines of communication through the South China Sea, through the Straits of Malacca and the Indian Ocean onto the Middle Eastern oil fields. The United States maintains good relationships with the Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, and India to counter all of these moves. According to the DoD report cited above, China's 1.4 billion people are reliant on oil and natural gas imports. 84% of her oil needs and 61% of her natural gas needs are met via oil tanker, which have to be traveled by the sea, of course. Russia's Soviet-era pipeline can only provide 1.6 million barrels a day at its absolute max, only achieving an average of 600,000 barrels in 2019, far short of China's 10.9 million barrel a day total imports. Her rumored strategic oil reserves are only about 90 days at best. A protracted Taiwan crisis may allow for the U.S. and allied forces to blockade vital Chinese oil in the Indian Ocean, far outside the reach of her formidable A2AD weapons and sensors. It will be far harder to economically isolate such an integrated globalized power like China, but she does suffer from fundamental geostrategic handicaps that cannot be fixed by her projected naval buildup. Evidence of a stress system are already showing. The zero COVID policy is handicapping her manufacturing and construction sectors. Some young Chinese are already forming mortgage strikes, refusing to pay for unfinished homes. Chinese tanks had to be rolled out to stop locals of Henan from making a run on the banks, as Chad alluded earlier. The Chinese yuan is so volatile, it will most likely never replace the dollar as the global currency reserve. As far as my opinion, I believe the 2020s will be the most dangerous time. President Xi Jinping, the most powerful leader since Mao, may well decide to roll the dice on Taiwan while he has the best relative parity with U.S. forces before the Taiwanese island can further fortify and ready itself, and most importantly, while he still has the economy and enough people to throw into the effort. That's all I got for now, guys.
All right, so great intro there by Rob. I'm still not convinced China wants military conflict, seeing as how they seem to be doing so well here on our soil. Let me explain what that means. So Sun Tzu said, know yourself, know your enemy. In 100 battles, you will not fail. So let's talk about our enemy. Most of what we are seeing today in terms of subversion is best articulated by the Chinese themselves. In the late 1990s, 2 Chinese colonels wrote the strategy that we are now seeing play out. It's called unrestricted warfare. Real quick, let me read a relevant quote from the introduction of the book. The new principles of war are no longer using armed force to compel the enemy to submit to one's will. Are using all means, including armed force or non-armed force, military and non-military, and lethal and non-lethal means to compel the enemy to accept one's interests. So what does this mean? It means engaging not only in military operations, but everywhere else. It means the battlefield is everywhere. So the CCP engages in economic warfare, political warfare, technological warfare, trade warfare, and psychological warfare. We can see this play out in many ways. For example, the tendency of American corporations to label China as a friend instead of foe. In other words, businesses cannot call China an enemy. You know, Bruce, last time we had this stream, it was this stream or a couple streams ago, mentioned the new Red Dawn movie. Originally, the bad guys in the movie were Chinese, but the Chinese threw a fit and it was changed to North Korea. As if North Korea could invade America. They can barely feed their old goddamn soldiers. So that makes the movie highly unrealistic. This is a great example of how China weaponized economics to achieve a political goal. They don't want us to see them as an enemy. This is by design. This is kind of a blend of economic and psychological warfare. They're training us psychologically to look away while they defeat us on the economic battlefield. I've got a slide pulled up right here. They're also weaponizing wokeness. In 2021, China issued a report on systemic racism in the US. So just remember what Vladimir Lenin said: the capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them. And make no mistake, we are selling China a massive rope.
I mean, were we helping Hong Kong? We didn't. We didn't help Tibet in the 1950s, and we didn't help the people of Hong Kong. And so China has its own internal problems, and we don't leverage that in our favor. And then our assumption is, yeah, they won't leverage it, our problems, in their favor. And they've shown time and time and time again that they will. I agree with Chad. Why would China risk a shooting war if they can win by other means and not take such a risk?
I mean, it makes sense, but we also didn't think Russia was going to invade. They did.
That is absolutely true. And there's no question about it, Brent. When you said that, that struck home with me, because we all know China's most dangerous course of action is to attack. There's no question. The USA did nothing in Ukraine. Okay, I'm sorry. We sent warm hugs and we said, yay, everybody change your social media flag to Ukraine. We really did very remarkably little. And this demonstrated a lack of political resolve from our corrupt and exhausted, old, aging, greedy politicians at a national level. Look up there. They're ancient. My God, they're in their 70s and 80s. The last time they were hip was, the 1950s? The early 60s? I mean, they went to a beach. These guys are ancient. And they're as corrupt as the day is long. They're paid, they're supposed to be paid $240,000 a year, but they're all, billionaires or millionaires with $80 million, $400 million, $1.2 billion. And they didn't make that on their salary. They didn't make that on salary. And if they made an investment, they made it through illegal investments. And they made it in places like Ukraine and China and Taiwan. And so we have a wickedly corrupt government. The Chinese see this, and they see our government's lack of political resolve. And so, yeah, I can see that the most dangerous course of action China could take would be to attack. And America would have very, very little to say or do. And surely China knows this after watching Ukraine. Surely China knows this. So look, I could be wrong. Maybe they are going to put it all in, and say, let's go. Not like we're going to stop them. But why? Why, when they're winning by other means? They're winning economically. We can't even make a movie. A private industry cannot make a movie that talks bad about China. My God, you know what? We call it West Nile disease. We call it the Spanish flu. We call diseases by the place that we think they originated. Doesn't matter whether they really did or not, by the way. Doesn't matter. It's where we think they originated that we then go, okay, we're going to call this disease by that. And we've done this forever and ever and ever, amen. I mean, we can go back in the 1800s and we've done this. We're not allowed to call COVID the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus or anything like that. Why? Because China's got a death grip on our civil liberties. They don't need to go to war. They already govern this nation, America. They do. And again, I'm with Chad. I actually am kind of, in an odd way, romantically pro-China, but I'm vehemently anti-communist. So I want to stab all the Chinese communists in the neck and watch them bleed out. So I'm super, super anti-communist. But the Chinese people are pretty darn cool. And I have nothing against them. Still, the communist Chinese are winning. Why do they need to fire a shot?
Yeah, great question, Doc. There was a comment recently here in the chat about asking if we were to go to war, could we ramp up production like we did in the Second World War? Unfortunately, the answer to that is both yes and no. We can, of course, always increase production because a lot of times right now our ship production schedules are time and money based. We could produce things faster, not significantly faster, but we could. So there could be some ramping up. Your problem is unlike at the beginning of World War II, we don't have nearly the amount of shipyards we used to have. We have very few, and I am sure China would take methods, both conventional and unconventional, to take those yards out of production in any way they could, even if it's simple disrupting supplies, getting to the yards for building the ships, or whatever. But from there, the other problem you have is in World War II, most of your key ships either already existed or were planned to be built prior to Pearl Harbor. All the carriers that took place in World War II were planned to be built before Pearl Harbor was bombed. Same with the battleships. Matter of fact, there were battleships that Congress had authorized to be built that never got built during the war, specifically the Illinois and Kentucky, the last two members of the Iowa class, because these things take so long. Our ability to replace an aircraft carrier, if it's lost today, that's 5 years. I think the fastest we ever built a Nimitz was in 4. So any carrier lost is going to be almost irreplaceable. And while we can say we have 11 to China's eventual 5, the point is theirs all are on their home territory and ours are divided between 2 fleets. So we essentially have parity right there because half the carriers are in the Atlantic, half are in the Pacific. Not saying they can't be transferred, but it takes time to get from one side of the earth to the other.
So,
Rob, go for it.
yeah, can you all hear me? Yep. Okay, so great point. A lot of our ships were built, or at least on the drawing board before then. The good news is that it is definitely, you know, as the Pentagon puts it, the pacing threat. So we're already looking at this as the pacing threat and trying to bump up our numbers. But the problem is our shipyards aren't the same. We're already having problems finding skilled welders, pipe fitters, shipyard workers in general. And even if we do dump a bunch of our money into the shipyards, like you said, it's going to take a while to build these ships. They're far more complex than they were in World War II. And on top of that, we might not even find enough yard workers to fill these shipyards and get them out there. So if we do end up, if the balloon goes up and we do end up having a massive surface and subsurface war and air war with China, we're most likely going to fight with the fleet we have, and more importantly, the missiles we have. We'll probably have to come up with a plan to refill our VLS launchers as well and make sure we have enough stockpiles to refill those. Additionally, I think that we need to make sure that Taiwan is sufficiently armed to begin with. A lot of the CSIS stuff I've been watching, and you know, you don't have to be a genius to realize this, that Taiwan's advantage is that it's an island and it can be defended from a very complicated amphibious invasion, but they have to have the tools to do it, and resupply is going to be much harder than Ukraine. So I'm not really sure if the Ukrainian analogy is as applicable to Taiwan as we'd like it to be, because Ukraine has highways and railways and friendly countries and NATO countries that they can ship HIMARS batteries, billions of rounds of ammo, reloads for everything, and supplies. Taiwan will have to do it by sea. And like I said, the local strength of China is pretty damn strong, just from their shore batteries, not to mention a couple aircraft carriers out there and their fixed wing aviation from their land bases. So it's going to be more complicated. Conversely, if we keep sending weapons to Taiwan, upgraded F-16s, et cetera, it may force Chinese planners on the other side of the strait to be like, you know what, we got to go now before it becomes too well defended. So we might end up bringing about a war that we're trying to prevent. So what I'm saying is it's a very complicated strategy. I see somebody's already talking about Peter Zayan's book in the chat here. You guys should definitely read it. I don't think everything is as doom and gloom, going back to the whole, the Chinese have infiltrated and owned the U.S. A lot of that has happened, but they still have fundamental problems that they're not going to be able to fix. Like they're basically a kleptocracy. Their most advanced people, when they get a chance, they hide money overseas and they get their families out. Additionally, their population, they're constantly in fear of domestic revolt. Think like Tiananmen Square, something like that. And their population doesn't even own guns, and they're still freaked out about it because being in charge of 1.4 million people, and the only reason you've been able to stay in power is because you promised them economic development, at the growth rate of 10% a year for the past 30 years, that's slowing down. It's probably not going to be a thing. Not with half your workforce jumping out of, aging out of the ability to work in the next 10 years here. So that's why I say the 2020s are probably going to be the most dangerous time. Additionally, later on, we can talk more specifically about, tactics and operations on what it would look like if they did, sprint across the strait. But for now, I'll just comment on the geopolitical.
Well, Rob, you brought up some good points there, and some that were in my mind as well. I tell you, I've been thinking about China's grip on the U.S. A lot of people in chat focus on this. I focus on it too. A lot of people talk about it. Normal Americans talk about it, not just those that are spun up on it. We know that we are dependent on China for a ton of trade, technology, but just small goods, kids' toys, clothing, ink pens, you name it, cheap furniture. We're getting it all from China. But if there's any good news there, a bit of it is that it's a double-edged sword. Yes, we depend on China, but at the same time, China depends on us. We are giving China money for the goods that they send us, and they need that money. You look at this most recent, what do they call it? The inflation, save us from inflation bill or whatever it is. Well, a huge portion of that goes to like green energy. A big portion of that green energy goes to things like solar panels. Well, where do you think we're getting those solar panels from? Think we're getting them out of the coal mines of Kentucky? You think we're getting them out of the sulfur mines of Georgia or out of the automotive industry of Texas? No, those are coming from China. So China's as excited about us passing that, or Democrats passing that, as anybody, because that's more money for them. Now, they can spend that money on their military. They can spend that money however they want. However, they've got challenges. They've got housing crisis over there, economic problems. So they're struggling just as much as we're struggling. So for them to create a situation where we treat them like we did Ukraine, where we say, okay, we're not going to buy from you anymore. We're going to sanction you. We're going to put all these cost-cutting measures on you without even putting any troops on the ground or firing a single shot from our country. That's a problem for them, because just like Rob said, and Rob, you mentioned, you were exactly on the lines of what I was thinking. Every country's got to keep its people happy to a point. You abuse your people long enough, the people will rise up and revolt. And it doesn't matter what country you are or in what part of history that you reside. A government is always significantly smaller than its populace. It cannot be larger than its populace. And when the people rise up, even if it's with just pitchforks, you can have a machine gun. And if there's 100 of them of pitchforks, they are going to win that battle. And every government knows it. Our government knows it. All you have to look at is the founding of our country and the writings of our country, and understand what the United States is all about, to realize that it was set in place to answer to the people, because we as a country defeated one of the largest militaries in the world, the English. And absolutely, the Chinese, it's in every one of the back of their minds, because no matter how power hungry that they may be, No matter how much they want to control everybody, or what other countries that they attack, or what 1,000-year plan they've got to keep their people happy, because if the people show up at their front door with pitchforks, it's all over.
I want to bring up the possibility, circling back, because we've talked a lot about the possibility that it's not going to happen, right? But let's think also back to the Olympics, right? So Putin met with Xi, and a lot of it. There was a lot of conspiracy theories like, hey, they were coordinating this attack. That's why we had a live stream over. Is China going to invade Taiwan? Okay, well, what if the Chi-Coms are always thinking ahead, right? And, what if this has been their strategy all along? Because what have we been doing with the Ukrainians? We've been sending them javelins. We've been sending them HIMARS missiles, rockets. We've been sending them off. I mean, we've depleted a significant amount of U.S. military armament. We weren't sending them old surplus shit. They were getting brand new, current service 777 howitzers. They're not getting old M19 or 8s that old Les at Pegasus test was, jumping on back in the 90s. They aren't getting that stuff. They're getting brand new 777s. I see them getting towed in footage on Ukraine. They're getting HIMARS launchers from the Marine Corps, from the Army. All right. They are depleting stockpiles of javelins and all these rockets that would be used in a war with China. No doubt. Okay. And that stuff just doesn't show up overnight to replenish all our stockpiles. That stuff takes time to replenish. So, I mean, this could have all been planned from the get-go. Say, hey, our step off time is going to be 6 months after freaking you guys enter Ukraine, or 1 year after, to give the United States and its allies time to deplete their resources, because we know they're going to be shoveling them in there to help the Ukrainians. So that's stuff you guys got to think of as well. I mean, we've all agreed when Afghan fell, like, if they were going to do it, now's the time. And then we also know that the Chi-Coms have a very vast male population. All right, there's not enough women to go around. Oh, what are they going to do with all those men? They got to find work for them. And if I was the leader of China, I could find work for those idle hands, for sure.
Now, that's a valid point, because if you look at male-dominant populations throughout history, that is usually the end result, Brent. And it's not categorically true, but there's an obvious trend there, that when you have male-dominated populations with not enough females to go around, and that certainly is the case with China for multiple reasons, not the least of which is, of course, the one-child policy, where males were preferred. And then the second reason would be that Chinese women, leftover women and all this other stuff, they're making an exodus out of China on the first thing smoking. So you have got that there. I also put it in terms of, when Japan was in the 30s, well, hell, Japan started encroaching on its neighbors all the way back in 1905. But that's, neither here nor there. My point is, as it continued to expand its empire under this new militant regime throughout the 30s, America pretty much did nothing, right? Furthermore, we watched in the late 30s and early 40s, we watched the Nazis taking over all of Europe. And America did, we were alarmed. We said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But we did nothing. And we did nothing until Japan attacked America outright. If I were China and I wanted to make a move and wanted to start, expanding my empire and become an, imperialistic, I would take a note from the lessons of history. And I would say, okay, don't attack America. And don't, attack any of its closest allies, but take Taiwan, take whatever we want, and then hold fast and watch what America does. Because even back in the 1930s, when America was far more capable, we were very reluctant to get involved in foreign wars, and maybe rightfully so. We are insular by these great big ponds to the east and west of us. Okay. And so I think at this point they could get away with it. Certainly our political resolve is not there. Our political leaders are corrupt and old, as I said, and not willing to get into a war. But I think also you'd have a hard time selling that to the American people today. You'd have a hard time saying, hey, join the army with all the wokeism and go support our Marxist ideology and take back Taiwan. Who does that resonate with? Really? I don't know. Like I said, I'm a bit of a fence sitter here, but I could see where China could take its most dangerous course of action and could pull it off. I can actually see that. Even now, I can see that. I'm just inclined to think, why would they when they're already winning? Wow.
Well, there is one weapon we could give Taiwan that would give the Chinese pause, and it's actually fairly low cost. Let's have the Taiwanese give their people a Second Amendment. Yeah. Suddenly, everybody in Taiwan's armed, and now the Chinese have to face a rifle behind every blade of grass. That will do more than any missile, ship, or airplane we can give them.
Seems to be working in Ukraine.
Yeah, but the thing about that rifle behind every blade of grass strategy, you have to start watering the lawn kind of early.
Well, it's a novel idea, Les. And I tell you what, it's not a bad one. You're right, Doc, that even CNN and MSNBC supported the arming via AK-74s of Ukraine and the Ukraine civilian population. I found that rather interesting. So would the woke left even support the arming of Taiwan? And I'm telling you that that you look back on our country's history and our Bill of Rights and our Constitution, those rights are not granted to Americans. Those rights are granted to people. We put them in paper here for our country, but those are God-given rights, and God created everybody, right? So in theory, those rights should be extended to everybody, and it's not a stretch that we could start arming the Taiwanese people and simply saying, oh, we're just spreading a little love around the world, little freedoms around the world. I mean, we've done it before. This isn't the first time. I mean, we went into Afghanistan and we told women, stick your thumbs in a purple ink and go vote, start wearing pants, become school teachers. Now because of our current political climate, we obviously failed at that and pulled out. We did the same thing in South Vietnam, didn't we? But this is just another opportunity for us to never let a good opportunity go to waste, to say, hey, we're just protecting the rights of those Taiwanese people, and they need to be able to defend themselves, and ship a whole bunch of weapons over there for them to be able to use. It'd be interesting to see, and I'm a bit cynical here, but it'd be interesting to see how MSNBC, CNN, and all of the left-wing media spun that little stunt.
Oh, they wouldn't like it. They would much rather C-17s full of harpoons landing there than C-17s full of ARs landing there. Oh, I can tell you that right now. They won't like it until the war starts, and then they'll think it's a great idea, just like in Ukraine.
Well, if I might add, if the balloon does go up for Taiwan, we're going to have time to have a stream about it. Projections are that you need about 1 occupying soldier for every 10 in the population. You might need 1 to 2 million PLA soldiers and Marines, essentially everybody they have, all their ground forces, to get over there. And they don't have the current lift capability just within the Navy to do that. They'd have to marshal basically their civilian infrastructure to get people out there. Their Marine Corps and amphibious armor brigades will be the spearhead, but all the other privates and soldiers and all their food and whatever are going to have to be transported with the help of civilian infrastructure, civilian fishing boats, their fishing fleet, obviously. It's only 100 miles, but still, That's quite a far distance, and we will see that buildup. Our intelligence accurately predicted the Russian invasion when they were building up on the Ukraine border. We are most likely going to be able to predict an amphibious assault on Taiwan. It's also interesting to talk about maybe some of the future force capabilities. I don't know, Brent can speak to it more, but could you talk to us a little bit more about the stand-in force concept, the Marine littoral regiments? The Marines, I think, are trying to get the MQ-9 Reaper, their own organic ISR capability beyond just a tactical drone, more a strategic drone. And then the advanced base operation experiments. Basically, the entire Marine Corps is gearing up for this future conflict outside of just Taiwan, further into the South China Sea. If it spills into Guam, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk too much. There is some open source stuff out there, but obviously it's no secret that the Marine Corps is completely revamping. I mean, all the way down to the infantry rifle squads. But essentially, we're getting back in bed with the Navy, and we're going to facilitate the Navy's fight. So Marines, taking islands and being able to engage Chi-Com vessels from those shores. We've divested of tanks to make ourselves lighter, more expeditionary, and it all boils down to helping facilitate the Navy being able to carry on that fight against the PLAN.
Yeah, another asset the PLAN has is 40% of the world's container fleet is Chinese. They can just call the fleet home if they want, and they can overwhelm by sheer numbers. Now, that being said, when that much of force amasses, we got some pretty cool stuff to throw at it, but they're also not casualty adverse as we are, so they might just go for that overwhelming numbers route.
The question is, do they think they can call home their domestic fleet and not import oil and export their manufacturing long enough to win the war and then get back to their economy before their people start starving? That's the question.
Incredibly valid question, Rob.
Yeah, I think that is the important question. I still say China will not make a move because they still have some instability within their own borders. Period. I think a popular uprising is what they fear the most. We see how they react with all these protesters over this banking crisis that happened 2 weeks ago. They just seem to overreact to this stuff. But I want to go back to what Bruce was talking about, the concept of a double-edged sword. And I think, Bruce, you're right. However, I would point out that China is willing to undermine the West economically, still our innovations, etc. We just aren't willing to go that far. And the most damning thing, however, is when our current president said in a speech that a strong China is a good thing. I think that's an indicator of how well China is doing with our political class.
Hey, to piggyback off that, Chad, National Security Coordinator John Kirby said in a press briefing that the United States did not believe in Taiwanese independence. Did you see that? Like, it's a pretty strong statement.
I do want to know what you guys, since you brought up, Brand, thank you, what you think about Kirby, and I will preempt this with my opinion on Kirby. I understand Kirby is under the wing of the Biden administration, but I've watched him pretty closely, and I know his history in the Navy. I do think he's a respectable guy. Chat, go ahead, hate on me. Just pile it on. But I think he's a respectable guy, and I think that he has done a good job of being as honest as he can, even though he's got talking points to roll out to the public. From the Biden administration, I think he's been as honest as he can and as respectable as he can about the information that he's given us. You guys are welcome to dispute that and tell me what you think, but I think that that's important because he was one of the guys I was watching when the Russians were mounting up and the Russians were building up to invade Ukraine. And going back, hindsight being 2020 after it all happened, going back and looking at what he said, everything seemed to be factual in what he was saying. So what do you guys think about Kirby? Since Brent, you brought it up.
I can jump in on this one, Bruce. So the official U.S. policy towards Taiwan since we normalized relations with Red China under Nixon back in the 60s is that of, early 70s, is that of strategic ambiguity. So we have the Taiwanese Relations Act. We don't officially recognize Taiwan as a country, but we want the Chinese to realize that we probably would defend them without officially having a defense treaty with somebody who we don't officially recognize as a country. And I know this is very maddening, and it sounds like I'm doing some sea lawyer bullshit, but really that's what it is. It's diplomacy. So we officially recognized the Chinese. We were able to let them globalize and become the rich and powerful Chinese that we knew instead of starving communists, because the U.S. Navy protected their ships to bring their manufactured products to market and to bring oil into their country for their economy. So we essentially worked with Red China to become what it is today. And unfortunately, Taiwan, the democratic Chinese, the guys who retreated to the island, kind of got left behind with the strategic ambiguity. So that's what Kirby's talking about. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if the administration has all its ducks in a row as far as keeping this, everybody on the same page. Because Pelosi announced her visit, and then I think Biden said something about hey, it's probably not a great time to do it right now. So I'm just not sure if he missed it, or if her office didn't coordinate with his office, or maybe the guy just forgot. I don't know. But it goes back to what Doc Larson was saying. It's, having leaders that are octogenarians and in their late 70s and stuff, maybe sometimes stuff like this happens. I don't know. I'm not saying that they're in cognitive decline or whatever. That's not for me to say. But maybe it just slipped his mind, or maybe he wasn't briefed. I don't know. But there is some light between Pelosi and the president. And we have co-equal branches of government. She doesn't technically have to tell him what she's doing, but it's not a good look to announce a visit to Taiwan and not be on the same page as your president, who's the same party as you. I'd understand if she was like a Republican, but they're both Democrats. So that's that. The strategic ambiguity, you can look that up. There's a few memos and stuff, but it's pretty crazy with Taiwan. U.S. forces, if you visit Taiwan, you can't even be in uniform. We can sell them weapons and upgrade them weapons, etc., but we can't officially have a embassy there. Sorry, I lost the word there. We can't have an official embassy in Taipei, for example. So it's a strange situation. Another thing is Taiwan is the major producer. I know we talked about it last time, of the semiconductors and advanced computer chips and whatnot. So there is more than just, hey, let's defend a fellow democracy. There's also some strategic and economic, centers of gravity in Taiwan that we need to defend, more than just, hey, it would be good to defend a fellow democracy, etc.
Hey, Rob, can you talk about that one comment that poster put up about Taiwanese anti-ship missile defense?
Oh, yeah, they absolutely have that. Now, China just has so much more. They only have Taiwan only has 4 destroyers, 22 frigates, a handful of submarines. China, you can look at the numbers. They have so much strength. So, are a bunch of Chinese ships probably going to sink in the strait? Yes. We just don't know how many casualties they're willing to absorb. And just because you have a lot of land-based missiles doesn't mean that they can't be defeated. What might happen is the front waves of those forces might expend their expendables and their defense missiles. And then if they have enough, they can come back, and then, it just depends on how many reloads the Taiwanese have and how well protected their launchers are. If I were them, I'd have mobile Harpoon or similar anti-ship cruise missile, shore-based anti-ship cruise missile batteries, and I'd hide them in caves. I'd hide them, in railroad tunnels, etc., and I'd keep them on the move, just like the Ukrainians are with their HIMARS batteries. They're having such an effect on the battlefield because they can fire, maneuver, and hide before the Russian Air Force can strike back at them. So Taiwan's going to have to do that, and I'm pretty sure they've been preparing to do that. I candidly, but I'm pretty sure they've been thinking about this for a long time. They also have small missile boats, etc., that can go out and fire from sea from unexpected angles, etc. Additional point, the time to invade Taiwan is probably October or May through July to avoid the typhoon season. So not only are we going to see a large buildup, but we're probably going to know what time of year they have to do it if they're going to do it. So I don't think any of this is going to be very much a surprise unless the Chinese can give invisibility cloaks and, Wonder Woman's invisible jet to 1 million Chinese soldiers and airmen.
Bueller.
So I got a question to follow up on what Rob said, because it's been in the back of my head, and I'll admit, guys, I don't know the naval thing. It's not my forte, but maybe Rob knows. Maybe some of you guys know too. So I always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking submarines, right? If you launch some type of naval invasion, submarines are out there, and they're like battleship, right? They're just jacking you up. But so Taiwan doesn't have a lot of submarines. They don't want to lose them all in the beginning. What other submarines out there, maybe US or NATO, that are kind of like, they're behind the scenes, no one knows exactly where they are? Am I crazy? Am I talking like Rainbow Six stuff, or is this really happening? Would we have submarines that would engage targets of opportunity? What are your guys' thoughts on that? Because I don't know, but I'm thinking that if you've got these big ships that are transporting tanks, thousands of troops for some type of naval invasion, how, I guess I'm almost going back to World War II, right? Thinking about like the German U-boats that are just picking off targets at will, knocking out ships, and they don't know when it's coming. Is that something that we can foresee happening in Taiwan, or am I completely off base? Call me a boomer, chat, because I love it. I take your boomer, I put it in a 5-gallon jerry can, and the night before I go to bed, I pour it over my face like I'm a football coach that just won the Super Bowl. Bring your boomerism. I don't care. Bring it on. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, as a millennial, I'd love to answer your boomer question. So as a former surface officer, I can say that submarines are essentially underwater death ninjas, and they're incredibly terrifying, especially a competent submarine force. The problem with the Taiwan Strait is you're close to shore, so you're going to have a lot of anti-ASW assets, anti-submarine warfare assets, available to hunt for our subs or Taiwan's handful of subs, or if the Japanese are involved, their subs are actually pretty capable as well. Maybe Australia, we'll see. Suffice it to say, the underwater environment is not ideal for a sub because it's probably pretty shallow there, and the subs like deep, dark water. And it's interesting too, if you study anti-submarine warfare, the deeper the water is, the more the submarine can hide in what's called sound channels. Essentially, the sound based on depth, temperature, and salinity will bounce in these channels and carry for a long time. Whereas you could have literally a hydrophone above a submarine, but if they're on the other side of the sound channel, you wouldn't hear it. So that's the scary part. But that's better in deeper water. And then again, like I said, it depends on temperature and salinity. I'd have to do an actual study of what it looks like in the strait. But as far as submarines wasting torpedoes on small landing ships, that's not really what ADCAPs are designed for. They're more for taking out enemy surface combatants, large big deck amphibs, and big troop carriers. So you want to make sure you have a worthy target, because you want to make sure your expensive submarines don't get hunted down by destroyers, and you want to make sure that the environment itself, you have the ability to stack the advantage in your favor. So it just depends. If I was a Chinese admiral, I'd be thinking about these things. I'm sure they are. But the submarine threat is very real. They're incredibly deadly. They're not going to be by themselves war-winning weapons, but over time, I'm not sure how long the Communist Party wants to continue an effort that's supposed to only take a few weeks after they lost maybe their aircraft carrier and 3 or 4 big deck amphibs. It might not be very good for them, if you know what I mean. And our submarine officers are the best in the world, and the Aussies have just bought a plan to invest in nuclear subs from the US. That might take a little while longer. So we'll see how that the submarine stuff goes. And I'm glad you brought that up. I talk too much about ships and aircraft, but subs are incredibly dangerous. They can't do everything, but they're incredibly dangerous. They're harder to find than stealth aircraft, and they carry more ordnance.
Yeah,
Hey,
if I could
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, For.
if I could just quickly piggyback on that. In addition to the submarines, you're going to have U.S. nuclear-powered boats over there. And as Rob mentioned, yeah, the Australians are getting a nuclear capability, so they'll be able to get boats up there. But you also have the Japanese, whose diesel-electric boats, in terms of their combat capability, possess a lot of the capabilities of our nuclear boats. And even the Philippines now are starting a submarine program. And I think they're going to go with the French Scorpion class, another good rated submarine. the Koreans are building a burgeoning submarine fleet as well. And while your submarines, in my opinion, and Rob can totally fact check me on this, you wouldn't want to use them in the strait, but you'd use them to seal off the strait.
I'd say the other thing there, Bruce, is a bigger picture, and that is this, that military buffs and particularly military historians love to think about how a tactical weapon wins the war. And that's a wonderful myth. And it's one of those myths that perhaps we are, it's okay to believe in. It's okay to believe that at the Battle of Agincourt, the English longbow laid waste to the French heavy armor, cavalry, right? It's okay to believe that, but the reality is different. The reality is that the mud on that day played far more against the cavalry than the longbow did. And this has been fairly well proven at this point. It's still disputed somewhat, but the mud is what actually defeated the French heavy cavalry. And the longbow certainly played a role, and it needs its place in history due to that, but it just didn't play the role that we want to pretend that it did. And the Spitfire, the submarine Spitfire, brilliant aircraft, and it defended and it won the battle over, the air war over England. Only it really didn't. It was the Germans' change from strategy of attacking airfields and radar sites to attacking cities that actually took the pressure off those airfields and allowed the Spitfires to then eventually achieve victory. So we have these myths that we want to believe that there's a silver bullet out there. And that's a cool myth, and sometimes they pay wonderful dividends to rallying the people around the cause and, the faith that, we're going to lose a lot of people, but we're going to win in the end. And so it does, but the reality is that they don't play quite the impact that we want to pretend that they do. And I think you also have to remember this, Bruce. No one understands at the moment that they're carrying the Wunderweapon, that they're carrying a Wunderweapon. It's not like guys go, wow, this is going to change the tide of war. That's a very, very rare moment in time. And so I would say look at the dime, diplomacy, information, military, and economics. You want to look at strategically what's going on when you're talking about strategic goals, okay? Yes, tactics are how we achieve those strategic goals. And so then the tactical weaponry and tactics employed and all of the operational logistics absolutely play in. I don't mean to diminish any of those, the role that they play. But when we're talking at nation to nation, we're definitely talking strategy. And so I'm hesitant to believe that either side will win by a wonder weapon.
That's a great point, Doc. There is no silver bullet. If you look at the current state of pop defense on YouTube, everybody's talking about China's super missiles and their hypersonic glide vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. For every weapon, there's a counter, all right? And I'm sure behind classified doors, people are working on it and working on similar weapons for our side, probably. I'm not sure. I think we just tested a hypersonic glide vehicle last month. But, there is no silver bullet. You can always get a better defense for it or have better tactics to not be there when the bullet gets to you. And honestly, you can also, the other side is probably going to find that technology eventually. So what if the Germans had the V2 rocket and the Me-262? It didn't matter in the end. And what did we have in the 1950s? We copied the V2. We made it better. We went into space. We had the F-86 Sabre not that long afterwards, which would have wiped the floor with the Me-262. Like, these things happen fast, and it's only going to happen faster.
That's a great point. Yeah. Anybody else got anything?
Well, I mean, just that we've spent a long time rightfully talking about China's naval capability and, and the counters to that. But we have to understand that there's two other roles in play here. One is your air capability. By the way, since I'm bringing it up, Chad, I keep meaning to ask you, who is that dashing paratrooper behind you? But that brings up the point that, look, China can drop massive amounts of troops into Taiwan by air, only after it achieves suppression of any enemy air defenses, seed operations. But nonetheless, it can do it that way. It doesn't even have to use a boat in theory. And let's not forget that I'm talking seed operations, again, suppression of enemy air defenses, as well as suppression of enemy naval defenses. But you can also do bombing campaigns. Literally, it's close enough that China could just, use the Russian methodology. By the way, that's not China's doctrine. That's Russia's doctrine. Level the damn city. We can rebuild in 100 years. China doesn't look at it that way, and they're very reluctant to level Taipei. But it's an option open to them.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting question, Doc, because one of the things that we're learning from Ukraine is, one, the Soviet Air Force was not as good as it was rated to be. And yet, since 2014, when the very small Ukrainian Air Force started to learn our tactics and how to implement them, they've made a mark, and they have prevented the Russians from establishing anything other than local air superiority at given times. Now, the variable question out there, I don't think the Chinese, based on anything I've seen or read, are any better than the Russians, although that could go out the window because we thought the Russians were a whole lot better than they were. And I also can't say, well, how good are the Taiwanese Air Force? Are they studying our tactics? Are we training them? Are they doing red flag? When our forces are over there training, are we teaching them how to fight? That's an interesting variable we can't factor in. And then you have the other factor is, okay, the Chinese attack the Taiwanese, the air battle starts. Do we participate? We send in a couple carriers with our top guns on them. That's going to be a change. I think the Japanese getting involved in the fight, and they said they would, that will be a very big change because the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force doesn't have an offensive mission as far as bombing and ground attack, but they're very good at anti-air. So these are all things that could play against China. And then if the Koreans decide to get involved too, well, that's just going to add to the mix.
Yeah, that's one of the problems. I tell you, we were all expecting Russia to roll through Ukraine the way that the United States rolled through Iraq in the first Gulf War. Right. I think we're all expecting something like that. And yes, we, the West, the United States, NATO, have given Ukraine a lot of assistance, but in those early weeks, they weren't getting a lot of assistance, at least not that I'm aware of. They held their own on their own. The Russians made some blunders, and the Ukrainians took advantage of that and slowed the roll. And it was at that point that we, the West and the United States, saw that, hey, maybe we can get involved here because maybe this isn't going to be a U.S. versus Iraq type of invasion. This is going to be something that we can slow down and halt and bleed Russia for a while. And I think that that's how it unfolded. And I think that I'll speak for myself, was disappointed in Russia's performance. I think all Americans somewhat were. Those that knew anything about them, we expected for them to do better than they did. And I'll go ahead and I'll point out the elephant in the room tonight myself, which is we all kind of wonder, is China this big, great military that we expect them to be? Or are they a bit of the paper tiger that Russia was? I don't know. I'm not going to make that prediction. But and I don't want to see anyone in Taiwan hurt. I mean, we've lost thousands, tens of thousands of Ukrainian children, women that had nothing to do with this. Grandmas had nothing to do with this war. It's just war is always ugly, right? They wanted no part in it, and they've lost their lives or have been maimed or have been buried alive and all the terrible things that happen in war. I don't want to see that happen in Taiwan either. But in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, is Chinese as big and tough as they think they are? Or do they make a move against Taiwan and find out that they aren't and embarrass themselves on the world stage the way that Russia has embarrassed itself? Now, that's something for China to think about. And that's something that they don't want to do. There's nothing worse than a proud Chinese leader to embarrass himself in front of the world.
That's a great point, Bruce. I mean, they haven't been combat tested since 1979, and they didn't fare well against the Vietnamese at all.
No, that's a point.
They don't have veterans in their ranks. I mean, you're right on the ball there. I absolutely agree. Les, did you have something to say?
No, I'm just agreeing with you there, Chad. I mean, since the CCP is taken over China, and really before then, the Chinese really haven't performed. If you look at when Japan was an occupying force in China, the balance between forces between the Chinese attacking the Japanese and then what the Japanese defended with, all out of proportion. It didn't take many Japanese units to defeat large swaths of Chinese units. In the 1950s, China couldn't even get across a few miles of water to take Quemoy and Matsu Islands that you can visibly see from the Chinese mainland. They couldn't even get there. And then there was the ass kicking they took in Vietnam. Now, granted, at that time, the NVA was still full of regulars that had been up against us, so they were well trained and stuff, but still, they did not perform well.
That's a great point, talking about the professionalism of the Chinese army. Again, you can spend billions of dollars and you can have J-20, fifth generation fighters, etc. But how good are your NCOs? How good are your chiefs on the deck plates of your ships? How hard will they fight to fight fires on the ship, or just panic and run away and let the damn thing burn to the waterline? We don't know. As of 2016, they've done some pretty extensive reforms under Xi, trying to professionalize their military. They're trying to build up, NCO officer course, non-commissioned officer courses. They're trying to push staffs down at the battalion level. Believe it or not, they never had battalion staff up until recently in their army. They didn't, they got rid of the division as an organization. Now it's more, I think regiments report directly to their regional military commanders. So it's at the regiment level. So therefore at the battalion level, and stop me if I'm speaking incorrectly, I'm not a land warfare guy, but at the battalion level, they're actually trying to build embryonic staffs. And we've had battalion staffs forever in our Army and Marine Corps. So we'll see how professional they are. But as far as Russia going, suffering from their freaking corruption in their ranks, finding egg crates in their armored panels for their tanks, etc., I think China's probably going to suffer from a lot of that. Xi has surrounded himself with a bunch of yes men, and the people who want to speak against Xi are either dead or in jail. That's why I kind of likened him to Mao. And it's hard when an emperor will throw you in jail or kill you for you to tell the emperor he has no clothes, or that the military might not be as professional as they appear on parade. And they look pretty damn good on parade, but so did the Russians. Okay? And we both looked really nice on parade. But that's not war. And we will see. I mean, are Chinese ships as tough as they are expected to be? I don't know. We'll see. I mean, you can buy more with the Chinese yuan than you can with the dollar, but so you could with the ruble. So some of these ships on paper, for example, the Renhai freaking battle cruiser they just built, that thing's terrifying. It's like a destroyer on steroids. I'm not sure how they'll fight in real life, but they're building a bunch of them, and they have a lot of other destroyers, and maybe quantity is better than quality at this point. But if China can't win a long war, going back to Bruce's point, it may not be the objection to completely defeat the Chinese army. You might want to just embarrass them enough so that they had to worry about it at home more than Taiwan.
Yeah, talking about the at-home thing, I want to kind of open this up a little bit, kind of take it a different direction. We've seen how they've reacted to these banking protests, and they sent in the military, quashed it as quickly as possible. You had protests over COVID-19. You had protests in Hong Kong, the freedom protests a couple of years back. It seems these events have scared the living hell out of the CCP, and it seems to me at least that a popular uprising would be the biggest fear, the greatest fear of the CCP. So kind of switching gears a little bit, how can we use that to our advantage?
I've been waiting for this to go that direction. So, all right. So there's so America's relationship with Taiwan, political. Let's get political here. It's changed over the past, 70 years. And what I mean by that is, look, in 1947, General Chiang Kai-shek is defeated by Mao, and he leaves the mainland and he escapes to this island of Formosa, which had switched hands between China and Japan, which is kind of sad because they were their own people, but they kept being conquered by China and Japan, right? And tossed back and forth. So Chiang Kai-shek retreats to Formosa, And he calls it, note what he calls it. He calls it the ROC, the Republic of China, to differentiate itself from the government ruling mainland. But Shek vows at that time, he vows there are not two Chinas. There is one China, and it is the Republic of China. And so right away, America says, yeah, we agree with Chiang Kai-shek. There's political expediency to do so because the world was becoming, a Cold War. We're going communist versus everyone else. And so we say, yeah, there's only one China and it should not be communist. So this is 47. In 72, Nixon opens the door with China, and let's get to the heart of what that was about. Was it about economics? No, frankly, it wasn't at the time, although it certainly turned out to be. That's the carrot we held out. We were trying to drive a wedge between the Soviet Union and China, and we knew that there was bad blood between them. And so the carrot that we were holding out was, hey, we can make you a more economically successful communism than the Soviet Union. And so this was the opening the door to the recluse communist China, who had suffered under the purges of Mao and the excess of Mao and the incompetence of Mao and, the starvation of 59 through 61. And so they were ready for this. And that's what it was in 72. Today, you're absolutely right. It's a whole different relationship because, as we've already said, not to be redundant, but China has said, okay, now we get to change America. We get to change your politics. We get to change your social aspects. We're going to support whatever wokeism we want to. And oh, by the way, we're loaning you money and you're beholden to us. You have a lot of debt. And so it's an economic warfare that China is waging. And so here's my question then, and that gets to the question being asked is, hold on. The U.S. has backed Taiwan multiple times, insisting that there is only one China. So, it wasn't me. So, stop, Bruce, stop. Anyway, so my question is there just one China? And if there is, why does it have to be communist? Can we leverage our influence in Taiwan, the Republic of China, to win over more Chinese, more wealthy, middle class entrepreneurs in mainland China to say, man, I do want one China, but I don't want a communist central government. I want something else. And I think that's where we've fallen down, where China has been communist China has been so effective is getting us to change our movies, supporting our woke social movements here, and winning over. Notice I didn't say bribe and giving money to our politicians. I don't know if you guys know this, but Rand Paul was there in the Senate saying and calling names and naming dates, naming who signed what documents, and calling all of Fauci and all of the others, saying, "Look, man, I know what happened in China, and I know what happened with COVID. This was an unintended leak in a lab, and I know this because we've been funding it. And here's all the documentation saying, oh no, we weren't funding it, we're funding it." And he's like literally holding up documents, going, "Your name right here, this date. Here's the document." You go, "Well, that wasn't for COVID, And he's like, "Oh my God, no! It is under the program that you were funding." So why does America not want to call it the Chinese virus? Why does America want to sweep this under the rug? It's not even a conspiracy. It was just funding for some stuff that we're not allowed to do in America, but we can fund it in another country, say China. And so we were co-funding this. We didn't have great oversight, and that's how a leak happens. And I don't believe it was a conspiracy. I don't believe that the leak of COVID was intentional. I think it was accidental. I think it was poor quality controls. And China suffered probably much greater than anybody else. But the fact is, we have U.S. senators saying, "Hey guys, the jig is up. We know what you funded. It's right here in public records. And so, and again, they were right down. I don't mean like figuratively calling names and dates and documents signed. No, I mean literal, holding the documents going, look, dude, you're the one that signed right here. I've got your name. And so that's what's going on. Why do I bring that up? Well, you can see how in bed we are with China and with Taiwan. Why don't we leverage that to our benefit? Now, I know the answer. The answer is China has a centralized tyrant government, and that's a very easy decision-making matrix, right? What does the king say? The king says we're doing this, or off with your head. Fine, we're all doing that. In America, we have representative government, and China's betting on the fact that we're divided. China's trying to divide us. So I'm wondering, when do we wise up and go, oh, I see what you did there. That was clever. Now we're going to return the favor. Now we're going to leverage what we do well, make money. That's what Americans do well. All right. And we're going to leverage that, those creature comforts, the allure of that, blue jeans and Hollywood and nice wine. We're, cowboys and steaks. We're going to leverage that in Taiwan, and we're going to win over Hong Kong. And then we're going to win over, everywhere. Beijing. We'll win them all. We'll win your nouveau riche to America.
And if I can just say, I think that's the only way we win, because, if we look at this Chinese invasion of Taiwan, which will assumingly bring us into a war with China, it's another defensive war. Vietnam. We went into Vietnam to protect South Vietnam from North Vietnam, right? At no point were we launching U.S. divisions north to take North Vietnam. I mean, it's a defensive war. And, we can sit there and gain the initiative and fight the Chinese off of Taiwan, but at no point are U.S. troops going to be landing on the beaches of mainland China. It's never going to happen. So the only way we do win that war is by doing what Doc just said, and that's destroying them economically and having them win the war for us. And that's going to be tough.
I totally agree.
It's a fight we can win way easier than they can. I mean, that's a fight on our territory with all the advantages on our side. Because like one of the things, like if you were right now, the president of the United States, if he had the balls, which he doesn't, was to 100% ban imports from China right now, immediately, and stuff. Ban them all right now. The U.S. corporations that are having things made in China are going to Malaysia, Vietnam, India right away. I have customers that were getting stuff out of China when Trump threw down the 25% tariffs. They moved their stuff to Vietnam, and they're like, well, we're not going back. At the cost of moving, we're not going back. That would do it. That would right there. Then you get our NATO allies to come along with us. Anybody who's allied with us, literally give them the choice, us or them. China's done in 6 months.
The beautiful thing about that is it's already starting to happen. Again, going back to some of the books you can read about China's demographics and their workforce, they're no longer going to be the freaking sweatshop of the world. I mean, they haven't been. A lot of this stuff is already moving to Vietnam. Mexico has good demographics, and it's closer to a big market called the United States and much easier to ship stuff from. Like, things are already moving away from China manufacturing to manufacturing elsewhere that's not so politically compromised. And going back to the PLA, again, if we fight them, it's going to be a defensive war. And the thing about the PLA is they don't swear allegiance. The People's Liberation Army, they don't swear their oath of office to the Constitution or to China or even to the people. They are the bodyguards of the Chinese Communist Party. So any direct threat to their rule is war, because these guys know that if they're not on top, they're in jail. So going back to, I think we need to make sure that Taiwan has enough to defend itself, and we appear strong on the world stage, and just make it too costly for them to take Taiwan by force, and then watch them destroy themselves. And even if they don't want to destroy themselves, it sucks because, again, not all Chinese people, most Chinese people are good people, I'm sure, but they have so many fundamental problems. They have, freaking cancer rivers from all the environmental stuff they don't do in their country to achieve that growth. They've over-leveraged their housing industry. They have entire ghost cities of people. They don't even live there. And their workers are aging out. And the one-child policy, they can't even reverse it. They're trying to encourage their women to have babies, and their women are like, no, fuck off. I'm not going to have a child, and with this cost of living. So they have fundamental problems. Plus, we can drill for oil. We can do manufacturing at home if we really wanted to. And we have more natural gas than we know what to do with. Not to mention the dollar being the strategic global currency. There are a lot of advantages that we have without ever firing a bullet at China or China.
Next.
How about we segue into our next topic, Brent? I think we beat this horse pretty hard.
Yeah. So I didn't really specify next topic, but there is something I did want to bring up, and that is North Korea proposed sending 100,000 of its own troops to aid the Russians in Ukraine. So we got, 30 minutes till 2-hour mark. So let's kick that around.
So when I first heard this, I thought you were joking. I really did, because let me be quite clear. The DPRK is in no position to send anyone anywhere. Their troops are starving. Okay. The entire force, if they were to go to Ukraine, would probably defect. So, I mean,
Well, Chad, that's the whole point. You have 100,000 North Korean soldiers standing there with a sign in Russian that reads, "We'll work for food." They win as long as they don't die.
Shit, we don't have to send weapons to Ukraine anymore at that point. We send McDonald's.
Well, if we don't let the North Koreans know that Ukraine is full of a bunch of grain that they can't ship out, because if they find that out, they may just move there on their own without the approval of their government.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of making a meme out of it, but yeah, okay. 100,000 North Koreans. Okay, great. Yeah, starving, underfed troops always perform well on the battlefield.
Here's kind of my take on that. I mean, I don't know. I've not been to North Korea, and I don't know any North Koreans. I doubt hardly any of us do. If probably the closest one that's probably most familiar with them would be Doc himself, but that's not North Korea at all. But he probably knows more about North Korea than any of us here, is what I'm trying to say. But I think the thing is this, is that I think North Korea probably threw that out there just to maintain relevancy, right? I like how like when something's happening, like the Ukraine battle is going on in the news, and then all of a sudden one of the Kardashians, they paint their car blue and yellow or whatever, and it's like, what's that all about? It's in the news for 2 days because she's trying to remain relevant, right? She's trying to do the relevant thing and catch the news beyond, what is it, TMZ for a night or whatever. I think that's kind of what's going on with Ukraine, where they're going, shit. They're going, man, like you've got, or I'm sorry, North Korea, you got Ukraine, you got Russia, you've got China, you got Taiwan. What about us? We're bad guys too. We need a little coverage over here without any real expectation of really doing anything. I mean, the logistics of them to move 100,000 troops with the support equipment that they need there, and then to link up with the Russian logistical system and work as combined forces to do anything. That alone, even if there was an enemy, even if those two were just to do some joint operations together, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that, how that unfolds, because that sounds very difficult to me. I mean, we're talking about completely different language, completely different culture, completely different systems. I just don't see it being a serious threat. I'll be glad to come back on next Monday and admit that I was wrong if it happens. I just don't see it happening. And I don't know if this is something Doc can speak to, or maybe Rob can speak to, on the logistical side of putting two countries like that together that are so different from one another, but it'd be interesting to explore.
Well, we do it all the time, Bruce. Let's be honest. We have coalitions. Look at the coalition of the Persian Gulf War. My goodness. What do we have? 27 nations? Look at the coalition of, the UN, the the U.S.-led UN force in South Korea fighting the North Koreans. I want to say we had 29 nations that didn't even, I mean, you had Belgians fighting right next to Ethiopians, all right? And fighting right next to Canadians. And so I'd say that, honestly, my honest response is, if I were Putin, I'd take him up on the deal. I'd take him up on the deal. I really don't see a downside here. Are the North Koreans capable? No. No. I can't say this enough. No. God, no. How can you be capable when you have tapeworms and infestations in your body? No, they're not capable. And yeah, thank you, by the way, Bruce, for saying I didn't marry a North Korean. That is correct. I married a South Korean. Thank you. But, got shot at by North Koreans. I'd say this. No, they're not capable. Can they be capable in 6 months while you move them into the area, train them up, and then employ them? Hell yes. And while I'm saying they're not capable, note what I'm not saying. I'm not saying they're not dedicated. They're fanatical. They are human assault wave, die for the crown fanatical. So these guys are murderous. I can't see anything that Putin loses other than the finances and time it takes to spin them up. And let me go you another step. What I think is really interesting is Putin and Russia is not communist. Yet Russia, or at least the Soviet Union, came to the aid of North Korea at a very critical time for North Korea. And so, Korea owes a debt of honor. North Korea owes a debt of honor to the Russians. And so I would, honestly, if I were in Putin's shoes, accept this and start putting them on trains and moving them, to the West.
And an incredibly easy way to counter that? Send a U.S. division to South Korea. As soon as you send one division of our troops to South Korea, Kim will pull all those boys back.
Maybe.
Easiest way to counter it.
But they do have a massive 1 million man military. And again, not a very capable military.
Send 2 divisions then.
But a very, that's a logical thing. That's clever. I
think the rocks could handle the knocks just fine on their own.
They could. But here's the point. If you had 6 months to spin them up and arm them with Russian equipment, train them on Russian equipment, use your advisors to train them up, I think you'd find a very capable force.
I don't think the Russians have the equipment to do it.
They're not stupid. They're not weak. Okay? They're very dedicated people, fanatical people. They're smart and they're very physically capable. But they're not capable as a military force without Russia's help. Still, 6 month delay, 100,000. That can make a difference.
I think the only realistic use of the North Korean army is to keep South Korea out of a Pacific War. From my perspective, like they demonstrate on the border, keep the South Koreans worried about their border instead of helping us against the Chinese if the balloon goes up that far. I don't know if they have the logistics to get them over there and feed them. It would basically be a Russian operation. The Russians would give them old T-54s and probably some MREs from the 50s, which is better than anything they've ever eaten, and trade them up, like you said. And mostly by training, I mean feeding them. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
okay.
I just want to piggyback on Doc and say that, I absolutely think Putin has nothing to lose by taking these 100,000 troops. I mean, whether you use them as rear echelon, support troops, and I would agree with Doc. Once they're spun up, I mean, what do they got to lose, man? They're going to be better fed, better trained. I'm sure the Russians are going to better equip them with better equipment. I mean, we're talking about, the fanaticism that Doc was mentioning. These are the same. This is the same people that launched a raid into South Korea to assassinate their, prime minister and almost succeeded, right? I mean, shit, they're very capable.
Yeah, I don't think anybody denies the capability of the North Koreans or their dedication. I mean, these are the guys who took the Pueblo. These are the guys who kept that war in the DMZ going for decades, literally. I don't think anybody questions that. It's just, well, underfed armies don't perform well. I don't see where Russia has the equipment backlog where they can equip them. Not to say the North Koreans wouldn't go with what equipment they have, but they don't have deep resources of equipment either. And unlike the arsenal of democracy that's filling up the Ukraine, with all its good stuff, there's no equivalent of that on the Russian side.
I think they have some old arsenal stuff that they, people were saying T-55, T-54s. Yeah, but 100,000, troops coming at you is pretty impressive. I don't care if they have, brown belts. Yeah.
Enough.
So I think if you took the time to train them, form them, give them medical and, nutritional value, I think you could bring them in. Here's the thing that shocks me about Kim's offer, and that is he could never bring them back. If he sent 100,000 and 50,000 came back, how does he accept them? They've seen the light. They've seen the other side. You know what I'm saying? They've seen food.
What
and
makes you think he wants them to come back?
Who the hell would want to come back? And
no,
why?
I mean, why do you think he would expect them to come back? It would be like Ataturk at Gallipoli when asked, how do you expect me to beat the British in defense? And he told one of his troops, I don't. I expect you to die. And I think that's what Kim's thing would be. He would see it as a one-way trip. I don't think he'd ever worry about bringing them back. I don't think that's even part of the equation to him.
I think you're right. He couldn't want them back, whether it's 10,000 or whether it's 90,000 that he got in return. He wouldn't want them back because their blind has been lifted at that point.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. McDonald's becomes a powerful weapon.
During the Korean conflict, Mao sent division after division of former KMT soldiers. They were the last to surrender. Some of them were trained by the Americans and they were well equipped, but they were some of the last to surrender and move over to the communist side once the writing was on the wall in mainland China and they couldn't retreat to Taiwan. But Mao never truly trusted them. So all those volunteers and the human wave attacks in Korea that we see the newsreels about, the dark side of it is a lot of those were troops. They were troops sent there to die because Mao never really trusted them.
Well, it's a win for Putin if he takes them up on it. And, it's a little terrifying. Yeah, I mean, here's the numbers. Here's how significant those numbers are. So the numbers of, remember that Putin promised the Russian people, I won't send your conscripts into Ukraine, right? And then there was a three-prong attack. They lose the northern, they call that off, they retreat. The southern attack, they pretty much call that off. They have a little foothold there. But and then there's the attack from the east. And when they reconsolidate, they have quite a bit of success there. There are something in the nature, I forget the exact numbers, but there's something in the nature of 200 professional soldiers. These are often called a contract versus conscript, right? These are contract soldiers because there's a whole lot more Russian soldiers than that. I want to say 600,000 or 700,000 more, but they're conscript. These are contract. That means that they're better trained, better paid, better fed. But the problem is that he does not have 200,000 to push into Ukraine. He has somewhere about 170 to 180. And all he can do with the conscripts is bring them to the border and do rear echelon work, but he can't send them in to fight. We know that of that 180, and I say, why can't he put all 200,000? Well, he's got some out west, he's got some in Chechnya, and he's got some in Syria, right? So he's going to lose some to those requirements, those responsibilities. And so he winds up sending about 170, 180,000 into Ukraine. And we know that they bled off about 50,000 total casualties. We're talking about prisoners, we're talking prisoners of war, we're talking wounded, and we're talking dead. By the way, the number I've heard thrown around here more recently is about 55,000. And by the way, Ukrainians have lost, by those same accounts, about 45,000 total. So Ukraine is faring better because they're the defender, not the attacker. But Russia's lost about 55,000 of maybe 175, 180,000. So you see, it's pretty devastating. And you can see what 100,000 North Koreans would do for them. because they can go in. Yes, it is true that there are Chechen, regiments fighting in Ukraine. I think there is a Syrian battalion or regiment fighting in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. Wouldn't be surprised to see some Iranians fighting in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. And North Koreans, a sizable North Korean contingent kind of makes sense. And furthermore, kind of adds to the quote unquote legitimacy of Putin's force.
That's a good point about the Syrians. I forgot all about that. So Russia's already demonstrated they're apt to bringing in foreign troops.
Yeah. So, I guess it is alarming to me. Do I think the Russians are going to do it? Nope. I don't think they will, because I don't think they're still seeing this. We'll win in the next push. It'll be 2 weeks, boys. You'll be home by Christmas, 1914. I think that's how they still see this. But that's not the case. It's amazing because a month ago I was saying, well, Russia's won. They took Luhansk. It's just a matter of time. And they did it. They fell back and punted. They said, hey, why are we trying all this fancy Western Army stuff? Let's just do what we always do in World War II, in Chechnya, in Syria. We'll just use our artillery and level it, and we'll win that way. And they were winning up to about a month ago. They took Luhansk, and suddenly the Ukrainians got all of this artillery. They just got, and they're playing because they're a red team army too, although not exactly, because Ukraine has been, out of necessity, it has been fostering an NCO corps, a junior leadership, junior officers, and NCO corps, and you can see that in their tactical operations, or what we know of it. And I think that's been their upper hand. That's been the ace up their sleeve. But they've still been falling back because no matter how good your NCO is, when you're just under perpetual rocket attack, you attrit. Your numbers, there's an attrition. And so they were losing that way. But now that they can turn the cards and fire U.S., rockets and artillery and German artillery and British artillery back, this has really kind of reset the balance. This artillery, it's become an artillery war of position and one of attrition. And so maybe 100,000 North Koreans would, really benefit Putin. And I say that with some apprehension, but I don't think Putin will accept it, oddly enough.
All right, guys. So we're about a little over 10 mics out. I'm going to go round robin and close this out. So we'll start with Les, and we'll make our rounds. Go ahead, Les.
All right, it's been definitely an interesting conversation tonight. I would say I agree with what we've said in the past. I think war with China is coming. I think it will be a hot war, even if a limited hot war. And I think the United States needs to prepare now. We are in one of the worst defense positions we have been vis-a-vis the size of our fleet. Our modern warships take more time to build, so we need to start building now. And the other reason we need to start building now is, unlike the Second World War, we have no reserve fleet. So the ships we have are all we got. They're old, they're in need of replacement, and we need to build a lot of ships now.
Muted.
Goose.
Sorry, guys. I completely agree with Les in terms of, should we be building now? Why not? I've always believed in us having a strong federal military with the ability to deal with enemies that are foreign. I never like being in a situation where we are sort of scaling down the military just because we're not in a current conflict. I think that invites a future conflict. I felt that way my whole life, and I feel that way now, regardless of who the enemy is. You don't know who the enemy tomorrow is going to be until the enemy shows up. You should be prepared for that enemy. But I disagree with Les in that I don't think China is going to make a move on Taiwan militaristically. And I don't even feel that we're going to see North Korean troops at the scale of 100,000 involved in Ukraine. Again, I'll come back next week and admit that I was wrong. I've been wrong before. I admitted I was wrong about the Russians invading Ukraine. I didn't think that they were going to do that. And the U.S. government's intel was correct when they were saying that that was imminent. And I continued to believe that it wasn't going to happen. So recently I've been wrong. I'm not the guy to put your money on, but it's just my personal gut feeling. And I guess that time will tell, but these are definitely trying times. And I always support, whether we're in the most peaceful times, I always support the buildup of our military. I want us to have a strong Navy. I want us to have a strong Air Force. I want us to have a strong Marines. And I want a competent and ready to fight Army, not a woke Army that's out there for college tuition. And that's why they're serving. I want troops that are ready to go out and man the lines and sustain artillery barrages, because in my opinion, at the end of the day, that's what soldiering is. And anybody who thinks that's not the case, they're living a fallacy. They're not doing the country any good.
I think we might have lost Chad. All right, jump to Rob.
Thanks for having me on again. Always a pleasure to be on. As far as the Taiwan situation, to reiterate, I think the next 10 years are the most dangerous time. We need to play a very strong hand to show strength and solidarity, but also at the same time, again, it's dangerous. We got to make sure we don't push the Chinese into a corner where they feel like they have to invade. On top of that, I do want to call out our recruiting problems across the force. We're not the recruiters are struggling to meet numbers. And even with unmanned aerial and unmanned surface vessels, we still need people willing to deploy in the Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, etc., Army. So I think we need to keep looking for those young warriors, male, female, expand the tent to make sure that all walks of life see the military as a proud and professional occupation, and bring back some positivity. It's not just for college, and it's not just for some sort of strange, social crusade. Like, the military is meant to defend America and its interest. We need competent and qualified people. And I also think that we need to consider hiring civilians at perhaps higher rank if they have the skill sets, particularly in the IT and cyber fields that we're looking for. We won World War II because we had a bunch of citizen soldiers. We had professional Navy and Army, etc. But we also expanded with a bunch of people who came in from civilian life to meet that threat. So we may have to do that again, and that starts with having a competent and well-led force with good recruiting standards. Thanks for having me on, and we'll see what happens. Like I said, if it happens, the buildup will not be a surprise. We're going to see it happening.
So I'd like to see our country take a stronger stance against the CCP, especially with trade. Like Les was saying, ban Chinese imports and take business to Vietnam and India. We should probably follow the example of India and ban Chinese apps like TikTok and communications products. I still think Taiwan is not a priority for China. They have a lot of internal strife they're dealing with, and it's going to war with Taiwan would mean they'll be fighting a two-front war. They'd be fighting the war at home, and they'd be fighting the war in Taiwan. So we have no idea how the Chinese population would react if they did invade Taiwan, but we'll see. Could we go to war? Sure, anything's possible, but I think the Chinese population, like other Western nations, has gotten used to a certain lifestyle they don't want to lose.
So I will reiterate what Bruce said, and that is to own up to the fact that I called Ukraine wrongly, meaning that I did not believe the Russians would invade. I thought that cooler heads would prevail. Likewise, I am still of the opinion that China will not invade Taiwan. That said, here's why I could be wrong. For many different geopolitical, economic reasons, but not the least of which is the incredibly poor state of the U.S. military today. For example, we've talked about Naval, we've mentioned the Marines, we've even hat tipped to the Air Force. What you've noticed is that no one in this conversation for the last 2 hours has discussed anything about Army. And this is going to be an Army fight. Are you kidding me? If you're taking on the mainland China, the Communist Army, this is an Army fight. And yet no one's talked about the United States Army, and rightfully so. The United States Army is not fighting that war, is not setting themselves up to fight a war with a peer or a near peer. The United States Army is concerned about social justice platforms and green environments and flowers and making everybody feel special. So the United States Army is not relevant, and it's in a wickedly unstable state. Add to that the utter lack of political resolve in our aging and corrupt government. So, while on one hand I say China won't do anything in that regard, I have to admit, it's not like we could do anything about it if they did decide to attack Taiwan. We could make a mild effort at best militaristically, but without the army, no sustainment of any fight. So, so maybe I'm wrong, but here's what I see. Our own weakness aside, I don't believe that China will run the risk of war for the reasons that other people have mentioned here over the past 2 hours. And that would be Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, the Philippines, Australia. They have very real interest in that region. And I think they would step forward, not America. We would arm them. We would send rockets and missiles and artillery. So I think that China's not going to risk that, and they're not going to risk the economic impact of it. I think instead, what we should do, what America should do, is to turn the temperatures up slowly. The old frog in the soup pot. We should turn it up, and we should wage economic warfare, cultural warfare on China, on mainland China, communist China, just as they are today in our home country of the United States of America. And I think that's the way forward. That's the way forward if we want to find success here.
All right, guys, I want to say that I thought this was a great stream. Appreciate all my guests coming on, especially Rob jumping on tonight, giving his expertise on the naval side of aspects of this conversation. And I am of the belief that China will invade Taiwan. This time, I doubt. Kind of what Rob was saying, I echo that. I would think that there would be a significant buildup prior to, we probably would see the PRC claiming, just like the Russians did, oh, it's just a military exercise, no big deal. But I think it'd be a significant buildup to the point that where U.S. intelligence agencies, just like the Russians, would be saying, hey, invasion's imminent, be prepared. So with that being said, guys, I do think eventually it's going to happen. I don't know when, though. We need to be prepared in terms of the U.S. military needs to be prepared. I echo what Doc just said. We need to start waging an economic war against China because, they're growing significantly, and eventually they're probably going to outpace us. The writing's on the wall. And, I don't want to live underneath a freaking communist flag, and we need to step up our game. So with that said, guys, I appreciate everybody jumping on tonight. It's been a great stream, and we've had a lot of people in here tonight and had a lot of conversation on the side. So thanks for joining us tonight. Until next week, thanks for watching.